the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction Representative, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the National Disaster Management Council, non-government organizations, and our friends and key stakeholders, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, Nisambul Vinaka, and very good morning to you all. I hope you all had a wonderful 50th anniversary celebration wherever you spent the weekend. Thank you to everyone who helped make our nation's 50th birthday such a special moment of our history, including the members of our disciplined forces for helping us recreate the moment of Fiji's independence 50 years to the day at Albert Park. Let's get back to business. Weeks away from the start of the cyclone season in the South Pacific. I am grateful to be here to launch the National Disaster Awareness Media Campaign, and of course to join you in the celebrations marking the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Today marks the start of our concerted push to reinforce life-saving messages that can save lives when disasters strike. And we will be looking to our friends in the media to help us reach as many of our people as possible. Fijians are no strange to disasters. This year, our ability to manage crisis was put to the absolute test. Cyclone Harold struck us in the middle of Fiji's short-lived coronavirus outbreak. In those crucial weeks, any single misstep by our disaster response officials could have spelled a catastrophe of the highest order, but that did not happen. Our science-based professional response stopped the virus from spreading and allowed us to bring relief to those most affected, saving an untold number of lives, and the media was critical to that effort, reporting where people should go, what rules must be respected, and how our people were faring. There is no room for spin when you are reporting in a crisis. Disasters demand good information. Otherwise, we will only add to the chaos. Whether we are responding to the impacts of climate change, a highly contagious virus, or both at the same time, objective reporting of defects saves lives. It saves properties, it saves businesses. As climate change continues to intensify, the weight of that responsibility will continue to grow. It may not always get the same number of hits as more controversial news stories, but facts-based reporting on ways we can reduce disaster risk deserves prominence in our newspapers, on our news websites, and on social media. That is why, when disasters inevitably strike, a well-informed Fijian public will be well prepared and ready to respond. That is why this campaign is all about saving lives by getting people the information they need before, during, and after a disaster. Every Fijian knows how important that mission must be. As we are already experiencing, cyclones in Fiji are becoming more severe. Winston may have broken records in 2016, but the next unprecedented superstorm could strike anywhere at any time of the year. So we must be prepared at all times, everywhere. Today is the UN declared day for International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, which aims to strengthen the global culture of disaster risk reduction. We know no community on earth is immune from disasters. Climate change was making that clear. COVID-19 has made that reality more obvious than ever. And when we look for the lessons to improve how we do things, we cannot only look within our own shores, we must take advantage of the global body of knowledge and experience. And we cannot take a narrow view. We must look to every level of society to see how families, communities, organizations, governments cope with crisis, to see what has worked well and what has not. For our part, the Fijian government, through our National Disaster Management Office, is committed to creating a stronger culture of risk reduction in Fiji, across the Pacific and around the world. As a nation on the front lines of a changing climate, there's nothing theoretical about it. Fiji's disaster risk reductions experiences, and we have learned by doing. Our disaster authorities are battle tested, and we have amassed an invaluable base of practical knowledge which we are always willing to share with our development partners. We are adding to that practical knowledge every day through our grassroots relationships with communities across our islands, because we learned long ago that the most important lessons are found in affected communities. Some of the best ideas come from those who have lived through disasters themselves. Speaking of practicality, ladies and gentlemen, we are not only here to kick off this week with speeches. We have several products that we are launching today. Firstly, the Find My EC messaging system. The name is simple: Find My EC, or Find My Nearest Evacuation Center. And it is a digital system whereby Fijians can quickly identify their nearest evacuation center before a disaster strikes. No more downloading large files or combing through a long list to figure out where to go. This system sends tailored information to our people when they need it. We know how important that is. When a cyclone is brewing, every minute families can save figuring out where to evacuate by precious time to prepare. This tool, which is supported by the Rapid Pro system, which we are ingrained with support from UNICEF, our director and DMO is here to share the details later. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also sharing a number of community disaster preparedness stories, showcasing the very best of Fijian resilience and adaptability. These are stories we are hoping to see emulated across our islands, and we will be sharing them across our social media platforms. So please help us spread the message by giving them a like and a share if you can. For that I say, Vinaka in advance. We kindly ask the media present today to help us carry these disaster messages to the public. We will do the same throughout our National Disaster Awareness Week, starting in Batau on the 21st of October, to reinforce these messages before the next cyclone season. Additionally, and finally, to ladies and gentlemen, please check the NDMO social media platforms for more information on some competition we will be running through the month, including poster design, video production, and community mapping challenges. In the spirit of this new campaign, I'll end by urging our friends in the media to help us flood their social media channels with information on disaster risk reduction. By doing so, you may just help us save a life. It is now my pleasure to declare the National Disaster Awareness Competitions open, and of course to join you in the celebrations of the International Disaster Risk Reduction Day. Pinawala, thank you. Dhanyabad.
Dear Minister, Honourable Minister Seruiratu, everybody here, including of course excellencies from the diplomatic corps, dear guests, dear friends and colleagues from Fiji government, all development partners, NGOs, and of course including UN partners here. So it's my pleasure to be representing the resident coordinator, Mr. Sanaka Srongasinghe, and all UN colleagues in the room today on this, the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and also coinciding, as the Honourable Minister said, with the launch of Fiji's National Disaster Risk Awareness Week. So the theme of this year's International Day is governance, and at first glance is probably not the sexiest, most headline-grabbing topic around, but if you actually step back for a moment and think, what actually is governance? And governance is the way we prioritise, the way we make decisions, the way we allocate resources. When you reflect on that, it suddenly becomes a very, albeit unglamorous, but very fundamental issue in terms of disaster, not only disaster preparedness, but disaster risk reduction. And it's such an important issue that the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction had this as its priority 2 out of 4 priorities: strengthening disaster risk governance as a real key way forward to reduce loss of lives and loss of livelihoods. And not only that, also the first target of the Sendai Framework is to reduce the number of people who die in disasters, and it's been recognised that the key to that is strengthening governance. And so in terms of the first deadline for the Sendai Framework, Target E, which is for countries to have national disaster risk reduction policies, the deadline for that is the end of this year. And it's really great to see and acknowledge that Fiji, as we would expect, has really shown a leadership in this area with the launch of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy last year. It really sets the agenda for disaster preparedness and DRR, as the Minister was outlining in his excellent speech just now. And also just to take on from what the Minister was saying, this year it's becoming an overused word, but it's been unprecedented. We've had a global pandemic crisis that, of course, has affected us here in Fiji, but here in the Pacific has been largely experienced as an indirect crisis with these negative cascading effects that have really gone well beyond the health emergency. It's really had a massive socio-economic impact. And as the Honourable Minister also said, of course, in April we had Cyclone Harold, which hit large parts of Fiji, including Kandavu, where a few colleagues from government and the United Nations were there just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Also, not only those headline disasters, almost on a weekly basis there are those localised, small-scale disasters in communities across Fiji that essentially fly under the radar, don't make the headlines, yet are chipping away continuously at the hard-won development gains of communities across Fiji. So that is what disaster risk reduction is all about. That is what governance is all about. It's having a system in support of the tremendous resilience and capacity of communities around Fiji. I think it's really important for us to dwell a little bit more on this excellent policy. And I would in particular like to highlight 2 things that are not only important here in Fiji, but have really shown a leadership across the Pacific and indeed the world. The first thing to highlight about this policy is it consigns the era of focusing on one hazard at a time to the past. That era is gone. And as we've seen in 2020, we've had a period of cascading and compounding disasters caused by various hazards. And there's no alternative but for us to now look in a much more integrated and multi-hazard approach. And that sets this document ahead of its time. It really embraces the multi-hazard risk approach, which is essential. The second point about the DRR policy that Fiji has is that it really outlines the key role of the National Disaster Management Office. It makes the point that disaster risk reduction extends far beyond the remit of the NDMO. It goes into all sector strategies, investment and budgeting policies, and the more we can do to make these resilient and risk-proof, whether we're talking about the tourism sector, the infrastructure sector, the better we can protect those national development priorities that Fiji has set. So I think it's really fantastic that Fiji is not only on the right course for itself, it is really setting such a good example here in the Pacific and the wider Asia-Pacific region. And I'm delighted to learn that the Fiji government is still committed to this quite a significant comprehensive review of its current legislation and arrangements around disaster management. I think the lessons that we've learned this year, particularly around COVID-19 occurring at the same time as Cyclone Harold, will really position the government of Fiji and communities to be better positioned and to be able to address what, as the Honourable Minister said, is set to be an era of escalating disaster and climate risk, with disasters occurring more intensely and more unpredictably, and potentially having greater negative impacts. So in one sentence, disaster risk reduction, it saves lives, it saves livelihoods, it saves time, it saves money. It's a prevention agenda, it's a proactive agenda. It's hard to push sometimes because we're so focused on the short term. We're so focused on visual images of reacting to events that we can see. It's actually quite difficult to get into the psychological moment of trying to anticipate and prevent disasters that we still have yet to experience and we don't quite know how and where they will come. So again, I think it's a really important day today to talk about disaster risk reduction. It's a bit of a clunky term. If you actually sit and really think about it, it's a really important prevention development agenda. And with Fiji's experience over many years, and particularly recently since Cyclone Winston 2016, since then, it's really the only way for us to go to protect those hard-won development gains. So I really salute the Minister's leadership, colleagues from the NDMO, the Fiji government for really prioritising the prevention agenda. And I think as we look ahead, it's a very challenging outlook. With the right governance and the right partnerships, I think we can have those sustainable and resilient development goals that we're aiming for. So as the MC said, we do have a short video message from the UN, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. We really address some of the key issues in a short address on why today it's all about governance. So thank you, Honourable Minister, thank you, dear colleagues, and we can have the video. Thank you very much.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought renewed attention to the importance of strengthening disaster risk reduction. Many countries are facing multiple crises simultaneously. We will see more of these. Extreme weather events have risen dramatically over the past 2 decades. Yet we have seen little progress on reducing climate disruption and environmental degradation. Bad situations only get worse without good disaster risk governance. Disaster risk isn't the sole responsibility of local and national authorities. COVID-19 has shown us that systemic risk requires international cooperation. Good disaster risk governance means acting on science and evidence. And that requires political commitment at the highest level to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. To eradicate poverty and reduce the impacts of climate change, we must place the public good above all other considerations. For these reasons and more, this year's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is all about strengthening disaster risk governance to build a safer and more resilient world.